Because you know how it goes, man. The first couple of minutes are just us chatting because it doesn't officially start until we get 30 people.
Yeah, it's all good.
So you
It's
can
all
just
good.
continue. So you were classically trained.
So I'm classically trained. Yeah, I'm a
Right.
classically trained singer, and I really, really regret not listening in theory classes because I arrange a cappella music and like I do it okay, but if I listened in theory classes, I could do such better stuff.
Well, what do you
And
mean specifically?
theory,
Well, no, I
the
know what music theory is, but like, what do you mean? Like what would be different
it's a
had
struggle.
you?
It's a real struggle for me when I have ideas in my head and I know you there.
Yeah, 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 I'm here. I was just hopping over to the stream itself so I can see what people are saying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 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 no
Um,
worries. Don't mind me.
what was I saying? It's a struggle. I can arrange stuff pretty well, but it's a real struggle. And if I knew the formulas and the particulars of music theory, it would be a much easier experience.
Hmm.
It's like thinking of a chord one note at a time, as opposed to, the formula of the whole chord kind of a thing. I really feel like I've missed that. Um, and also, it was classical music, and I'm not really into classical music. So
Right.
I wish I had thought of that when I was in school, that I would have more aggressively pursued the kind of music that I like, which is like Billy Joel and James Taylor and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, it seems like for pop music, you just need to have like, because I took a music theory class, I mean, just a basic one. And
Hmm.
I liked it a lot because I was able to like make those connections. Like you really dive into what exactly a 145 means.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, but I'd imagine the more advanced you get, the harder it is to make those connections if you don't connect with the type of music it's based on.
I think that's actually exactly. I hadn't really articulated it that way before, but it's the more complicated you want to get, the more difficult it gets. I don't know if you know this. I'm really into acapella, and there's an acapella group called Take Six, and they're very religious. That's not why I like them, but they're extremely intricate harmony,
Uh-huh.
extremely intricate. That's my goal, and it's just impossible to go that deep without a better education. So part of me wants to like go back to school, kind of a thing, but
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
it.
All right, so we have to switch gears here real soon, but one last
Sure.
question. So what's your range before we get into what we're actually here
I
for?
Vocal range. I'm a basically a high tenor. If I really
Okay.
warm up, I can be a pretty high tenor. I can do counter tenor too. I can do like really, really like higher than girls kind of stuff if I want to. Um,
Good
like
for
Bee
you,
Gees,
buddy.
Bee Gees on what do you call it? Bee
Really?
Gees on steroids, kind of a thing. Yeah, if I want to, yeah,
You gotta find a band. That's what you gotta do. Screw
I
theory. You
I
gotta
do, yeah, I do miss it. I
do
I
you
must
play
admit.
anything?
No, I don't. I want to get. I can struggle on piano if I work
Oh,
hard. I
okay.
can learn complicated stuff, but I want to get into guitar
Well, you look
actually.
like a bass player, man. And if you could play a solid bass and be able to hit the high octaves, people would you'd be very in demand.
Okay.
So
Okay.
anyway, guys,
I don't see
welcome.
you. It's totally cool, but I don't see you.
Oh, you can't see me?
No, I hear you fine, but
I think it must be a setting on your end, man. I think we're here.
okay.
I mean
Oh,
that's
I
cool with me if
now I
it's cool
do.
with you.
I just
Yeah,
have to touch the
okay.
screen. Okay.
There I am. People are already talking in the chat about what we're talking about. Guys, what's up? Welcome to Get Your News On with Ron, the world's first viewer curated streaming news show. We got a guest today, so I probably won't be able to get into any articles today because we got a guest. We're going to be talking to him. Please welcome to the show, Jeff Epstein with Citizens Media TV. And we're talking today about MMT. And quick mention here. You might have noticed that during the preamble chat we were having, we were talking about music. That's because Jeff is a classically trained singer, and he's a damn good one at that. And some of you, here's a fun fact, some of you that listen to the podcast, you'll notice on the theme song, there's a high harmony on the Get Your News On with Ron theme song. That voice is Jeff's. And he's a real singer, so he makes me sound a lot better. And that was really fun. Jeff ripped the demo, and he made that harmony and sent it to me. And he's like, I'd love it if you use this. And I was like, well, that sounds freaking great. So I'd love to use it. So, Jeff, thanks for doing that. And
That
thanks
was
for coming on,
amazing.
man. That was
That
fun.
was that was such a great little thing. And I'll just briefly say that it was the first major thing that I've been into music wise since Bernie Sanders. And for my first big music thing since Bernie Sanders to really mix, my kind of politics with music is a really cool thing. So thank you for taking it and going with it.
My pleasure, man. All right, so you are, I get, what's the right way to put it? Like an activist with MMT, or you're trying to kind of be an educator about these ideas? Like what's kind of the best summary?
Well, it fell into my lap because Bernie Sanders teaches us, this is why the world stinks, and these are the things we should have, and if we have them, this is why. And so I kept on asking the question, okay, well, that's great. So why don't we have it? 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 And then the answer fell into my lap, which was MMT. And so it's just another tool of trying to push the kinds of agenda that people like you and me want to do. That it's actually the final step in the tool in actually getting these things. So it's just sort of an extension of just activism, I think.
So what is MMT?
Well, I have an elevator pitch and I'd love to share it with you. Okay, so I'm just going to read this. I came up with this with your inspiration. Modern money. I call it modern money. It's officially modern monetary theory, MMT. MMT is the study of how our economy actually functions. Modern money shows why the powerful always get what they want and why the people only get crumbs, nothing at all, or even less than that. Modern money shows exactly how we can actually get the programs that we need to survive. And it also shows that our government can easily give us these things tomorrow and could have given us these things decades ago. The powerful have always known modern money for war and tax breaks and everything that they want. They just do it. But when it comes to healthcare, education, forgiving student debt, and a job guarantee, suddenly they forget about modern money, MMT. Suddenly it's how you're going to pay for it, how you're going to pay for it, how you're going to pay for it, how you're going to pay for it. And the saying that I like to describe about this whole situation is MMT for the rich, rugged neoliberalism for the poor. So that's my elevator pitch.
All right. So let me, and feel free to correct me, but my understanding so far in talking with you and in some other things I read, we have a money system where our money is printed. It is essentially based on nothing. It's based on trust. That's actually what it's based off of. And the powerful, the most powerful among us, they dictate when and how that money gets printed. There is some oversight because otherwise it would make our currency completely worthless. But for the most part, when they want to print out money for war, they do it. When it comes to things that help the hoi polloi's lives, our lives, healthcare, education, etc., as you mentioned, all of a sudden they don't want to print it out. MMT, and again, I know it's way more complicated than this, but the kind of just cliff notes, MMT proposes we take those notions and we put it into the hands of the people. So we're printing out money for things like healthcare and education instead of unlimited bond money. Is that correct?
You are roughly correct with that whole thing. There are a couple of important details that are off, but yes, you're generally correct. Printed is sort of a discouraged kind of a term. It's more accurate to say created because printed implies physical, and physical is a really physical money. Dollar bills and coins are a very small part of it. Mostly it's electronic, like in bank accounts and so on, or credit cards. But yes, generally that's correct. Based on faith is really not accurate. It is money. We use money because we will go to jail if we don't pay federal taxes. That's why we care about it. It's not faith. It's fear of going to jail. That's a fundamental concept of any government. That the very first thing to implement your money is to have a penalty of going to jail. So you pay your people. The purpose of a government is to use the real resources at your disposal, coerce the people to use the real resources at your disposal to do what's beneficial to society. And money is what they give to the people to make that happen. But the reason that they use the United States dollar is because you'll go to jail if you don't pay federal taxes in the United States dollar. You have to use the dollar to pay your taxes. So if they didn't do that, it would turn into, you'd still have debts and things to pay, but eventually it would not be in the dollar anymore. You'd use other kinds of currency.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I just said trust in air quotes was because that's what's printed on the dollar bills.
Yeah,
that was all I was referencing to there. But
it's generally correct. It's generally correct. That is true. And oversight. The other thing is oversight. There's really no, I wouldn't say oversight, because generally just people don't follow rules. People just do not follow rules. It doesn't matter how good those rules are, how many rules there are. It Humans don't follow rules. But there is something that forces them to create money in a responsible fashion because it's out of their control. And the things that are out of their control are real resources. You can't change the amount of coal in the ground. You can't change how fast a gestation period for a horse or an animal. You can't change how fast you can educate a person to be some position. So what the oversight is not in human control. It's in the real resources that the country has at its disposal, because that cannot be changed by human beings, no matter how much money you throw at it. So, but generally, everything that you said is correct. That it's just an excuse. They want to have what they want. They don't want to give us what we need, and so they make some enormous kinds of excuses to make that happen. And the excuse is, to start to get into this, is that the federal government is just like you and me. That our conception of debt, our conception of borrowing, our conception of budget is exactly the same for me and you as it is for the federal government. And so they want us to feel the anxiety of, if we have healthcare, if we have free college, then that will create this debt, that will create this deficit, that will create this anxiety, basically making it impossible for us to have these things because of these mythical scare tactics, basically. Not even basically. This scaremongering, all these things give us the anxiety that if we ask for what we need to survive, then it's going to cause economic chaos. That's what most people believe. So that all comes from the government can create money. The government can create money. They can create it because they want to create it. They just literally write a number into a bill, the president signs it into law, and money's created. And it's no different than a child drawing it on a piece of paper, a bill on a piece of paper, or ticking up the numbers on a scoreboard. Money exists because they want it to exist. And that fundamental concept changes everything. It changes everything. So that means that the debt is nothing like me and you. So when I go to a bank and I get a $100 loan, I immediately owe them $100 plus interest. Right. And if I don't, they'll really be on me and do whatever it takes to get my money back. There is no comparison to the federal government. The federal government doesn't have a bank that they go to. They have a bank that they command. The Congress commands the Federal Reserve. But there's no bank above the Congress that they go to. And so they borrow $1 trillion from this mythical bank above the United States, and now that bank is going to take the United States to jail. I mean, there's nothing comparable to that situation. So I'm throwing out a lot there, but
yeah. No. But I see where you're going with this. And one thing I wanted to mention, it seems like these ideas are kind of just a summary of a lot of economic ideas that have been around for a long time. I mean, I remember, for instance, when I was in college and I was taking an economics class as a gen ed, and
sorry,
you okay, man?
Nope, I just pulled my headphones. My headphones pulled it. Go ahead.
When I was in an economics class, and I remember, when I was in college, I was very, very opposed to the Iraq War. I mean, I still am. I haven't changed, but I was really opposed to it then too. And I was talking about it and talking about how we're spending all this money on it. And I was told in class that, well, that's just a number. Don't worry about the debt. It seems like when it comes to endless war and when it comes to things that benefits, the elite among us, they're never really worried about the debt. That's a non-issue. But when it comes to things, again, that benefit us, as we've been mentioning, we get the how are you going to pay for that? So going on that, and we already got some viewer questions lined up, but I want to get like a foundation first, and then we're going to go into them. It seems like MMT is sort of proposing, using these notions to benefit people, which is a brilliant idea. My question is, strategically and structurally, from a power construct, how do you get there? I mean, how, as you've mentioned yourself, the Federal Reserve is benefiting the government. That's who they report to. That's who they serve, essentially. I mean, some would argue they report to pretty much nobody, but we all know that the powerful, they're holding hands, right? So how would you take that construct and then all of a sudden have it report to the people? How strategically would you get there?
Well, for me, it's educating the people on how our economy actually works. Because these things are not what we should do. These things are actually what happens and has been happening for decades. It's just they use that knowledge as corrupt people for their benefit and against us. It's, modern money is just feelingless knowledge. It doesn't say what to do or not do. They choose to use it against us, but that doesn't mean that the rules couldn't be used for us. So I believe that you need to educate the people on what the reality is. There's nothing wrong with disagreeing on policy, like Republican or progressive or centrist or anything. There's nothing wrong with disagreeing on policy, but there's a real problem disagreeing on the reality of how our economy works. And that's what we're arguing about. And if we can't get together on the reality of how the economy works, then our policies don't matter, because we're never going to get there. But as far as the answer of how we do this is, if we can become a team by empowering each other on the reality of how our economy works, then we can join together and kick the corrupt politicians out of office and replace them with people who care about us and will use the rules for us. It's not changing the rules. It's just using the current rules for us. But we must get the corrupt politicians out of office, or all bets are off. And if the only way of getting corrupt politicians out of office is if we become a team. And we have to become a team to understand, I believe, that understanding what the rules of how the economy actually works, and stop being tricked by these corrupt politicians when they turn to us and say, how are you going to pay for it, and so on. That's how we can join as a team and start getting more Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes in, and so on.
So basically what you're saying is, if we have this rise of mass awareness, where people are saying, no, stop dangling this debt carrot over our heads. We're not falling for the bullshit anymore. We can print out the money tomorrow and have universal health care and have a Green New Deal and have free college. So we're going to elect the people that are willing to do that are willing to sign off on that. And once we get all of them elected, we're going to have a different country. Is that of like a very soundbitey summary?
That's generally it. Yeah. But It's important to understand that giving us healthcare is not just giving us healthcare. It's not just stopping them from profiting off of us. Yes, they want to profit off of us, off of our sickness and suffering and death. They definitely do. But that's not the biggest thing. Giving us Medicare for all empowers us. And by definition, that means it takes power away from them. That means that we are not chained to our jobs anymore. We can start standing up to our bosses, because we don't have to worry about our family losing our insurance. And even more than that, we can leave our jobs and start running for office, because we can afford to run for office. That, in my opinion, is the biggest thing, because Medicare for all will empower the people. Immediately, as soon as we get Medicare for all, power shifts from them to us. And even more so with the federal job guarantee. Now with the federal job guarantee, we can talk to our bosses and say, you must treat me better, you must pay me better, or I'm going to get a job near me with good benefits and good pay, and that's close. That allows us to stand up to our bosses. That is what they're trying to avoid. Not just they're holding healthcare from us or education from us. They're keeping themselves powerful, because the only way you can stay powerful is by keeping other people powerless.
Well said. All right, let's go to some viewer questions. They are lining up, so I'm going to get to them. Brent wants to know, so the politicians could simply grant banks all the student loan debt by the stroke of a pen, removing it from the students. Banks would still get their loan money. All right, I'm not sure where the question is there.
I can address that.
Yeah, please address that. It's a good point, but I'm not sure what exactly they're asking.
I can address that.
All right, great.
So war takes a lot of physical resources, clearly. I mean, everything is meant to be disposable. Bombs and tanks, everything is meant to be disposable in the military. That takes a lot of physical resources. Healthcare takes resources, but a lot less physical resources. Yes, you have to build buildings, you have to create the medicine and the medical tools and whatever. But compared to the military, it is a lot less resources. It's much more labor intensive. And you can train doctors, you can import doctors. People are being born every day, so we'll have more doctors in the future, especially if we give incentive for people to become doctors. The point is that there's less resources involved in healthcare instead of, as opposed to military. Forgiving student debt, there's no resources at all involved. None. The only resources that are involved with forgiving student debt is the consequential the consequence of giving all these people suddenly no longer having to pay $100 a month or $1,000 a month. Now they have the ability to purchase more resources. But directly speaking, forgiving student debt requires zero resources. So there is no reason why we could not forgive student debt tomorrow. There's just no reason, because we create the currency, whatever, $1.5 trillion to create the currency, everybody's paid off. Every private company, and actually most of the loans are held by the government, which was surprising to me. I would think it would be the private industry profiting off of them, but it's actually most of it's held by the government. Pay it off tomorrow. Everyone gets their payments. Everyone gets their money, but the students are now no longer chained to these loans. And so the point is that it takes zero resources to forgive our student debt, and there is no reason why we couldn't do it.
All right. Celeste wants to know, is the personal income tax, exchange of wages for labor, a legal tax? Question mark.
A legal tax? I don't know the legal answer to that, but I can say that well, we should get into. I should use that as an excuse to say that if the government creates its own money, whenever they want, however, for whatever they want, for as much as they want, and they're the only ones in the world that are allowed to do it, clearly they don't need any income. They don't need any income at all. If you can create the money, clearly you don't need to borrow it from anyone. You don't need to get it from anybody else, which therefore means that federal taxes do not, and cannot pay for anything. So the payroll taxes that she just mentioned, for example, the FICA taxes, which pays for Social Security, supposedly actually doesn't pay for Social Security, because federal taxes cannot, just logically extending from the fact that they can create their own money. If they can create their own money, then that means they need no income, which extends to federal taxes cannot and do not pay for any federal spending, including Social Security, healthcare, military, tax breaks, anything at all. So payroll taxes are a choice if it's on federal level, if we're talking federal here. Payroll taxes are simply a choice. Federal taxes are really important, which we'll get into later. But as far as paying for things, it's not required at all. I know I didn't directly answer her question, but I can't answer it legally. I don't know the answer.
Right, yeah, I don't know the legalese around that too. They mentioned the 16th Amendment not being ratified. Jordan, what's your opinion on the return to the gold standard? My libertarian friends argue that if we achieve our goal of ending all wars, close all bases, our currency would have to be based on something again.
Have to? I don't understand why it would have to. The gold standard would make the big lie come true, which means that truly giving the people what they need to survive genuinely would cause more debt, genuinely would cause more bad things. So the gold standard, like the debt ceiling, is just a choice. The debt is not a bad thing. The debt is, in fact, critical to the functioning of society. And this notion of having to pay off the national debt isn't just a bad idea. It's nonsensical. It makes no sense. What does it mean for someone who can for a federal government that can create their own money as much as they want, whenever they want? What does it mean for someone like that to be in debt? But can you actually please remind me of the question? I want to address it.
Yeah. What's your opinion on the return to the gold standard? My libertarian friends, yeah.
Yeah, so the gold standard would make this lie come true, because then every dollar that's spent must be accounted for with a physical piece of gold. So that would create incredible restrictions that makes it much more difficult to get anything that we need. It is a human-created restriction that is not necessary, that it serves them even more, because they don't have to lie to us anymore, because all of a sudden those lies would become true, because now we are genuinely restricted by the amount of gold that we have. I know that that's a little bit nebulous. It requires more background, which we'll gradually get into.
Okay. Is our modern money economics tied to our role as an empire? Meaning, if we lose our empire status, can we just print money for our ideas?
MMT, modern money, describes the currency of the United States, of Australia, of Canada, of Japan, of New Zealand, of England, and other countries. How powerful we are has nothing to do with it. So we might have more stuff, we might have more resources at our disposal, and a more, bigger military. So maybe we could provide more for our people, but more doesn't necessarily mean better. Every country, using all the resources that they have, can provide for their people as best they can. So a poor family can provide for its child just as well. That poor child might be happy and satisfied just as a rich child might be happy and satisfied despite having more or less. So the fact of being an empire or not being an empire doesn't change the fact that this is the reality of how our economy works.
Okay. Brent wants to know, Wesley Clark predicted all seven U.S. wars based on all the Middle East countries that wanted to go off the petrodollar and tried to. So I guess this is a question related to the petrodollar and what Brent is referencing. Wesley Clark, back when we were going to go into Iraq and nobody knew why, he was talking about that. And then he showed this list of other countries the U.S. wanted to go into. We ended up going into all of them. And it was all because some of these countries wanted to get off the petrodollar. So I guess respond to that and speak about the petrodollar for a bit.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen Jimmy Dore play that video a number of times. The petrodollar. I just wrote an article at the request of one of your viewers. I just wrote an article on the petrodollar. So I'm encouraging people to go and read that because we could spend easily an hour just talking about that. But the petrodollar itself is really a very small aspect of an enormous problem. And that problem is that the military industrial complex and the fossil fuel industry, the fossil fuel industry has too much control over our government. And therefore the government lets these powerful people use our military, which is supposed to protect the people. That's the purpose of our military, and gets to use this military as a toy to just get richer and to extend their reach across the world with having nothing to do with protecting the people. So the problem is not the petrodollar per se. That is a small part of this. But the problem is that the United States is just so belligerent, and we spend 7 times more than 7. Our military is 7 times bigger. You know what I mean? Our military is bigger than the next 7 militaries combined. That we use this so the rich can profit off of fossil fuels. That the fossil fuel industry has taken over our government, and the military is easily the biggest user of fossil fuels in the world. The problem is not the petrodollar per se. The petrodollar is really just one of the many consequences of the fossil fuel industry having a stranglehold over our government and basically hijacking our military for their own purposes. But I wrote a full article on this, and I would encourage people to read it. I put everything I know into that article.
Cool, man. Yeah, I mean, that's great. I would say maybe not so much it's a small part as much as it's sort of the kind of solidified data we can point to that's a result of this structure.
That's reasonable.
Marcus says, this guy is doing pretty well today, and I feel like I'm getting a lot from it. So you got some props.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you. That's very nice. Actually, but let me add one last thing to that. What would happen if we went off of the petrodollar would be really hardly anything at all. The rich would become slightly less rich. That's really the consequence of it. And the important thing is that the petrodollar has almost zero bearing, actually not even almost, pretty much zero bearing on any country's ability, whether it's the United States or any other country, to provide for its people. So yes, it has foreign implications, but as far as the United States providing for its people, it really doesn't have any bearing at all.
So let me try to add on that, and you can correct me if I'm off base, but the petrodollar is really just padding the pockets of oligarchs around the world. That's all it's really doing. But that's kind of waved over our heads as a reason to pursue an endless economy of war. So it's just sort of not necessarily a facade, but it's sort of one of those things. This doesn't apply to you. The petrodollar doesn't apply to you. It doesn't apply to me. It doesn't affect our lives in the slightest. It just makes corrupt rich oligarchs a little bit richer at the expense of using all of our resources for endless war.
I think that's reasonable. But if you think about it, if this is so important that our dollar is pegged to basically what the petrodollar says, excuse me, is that our dollar is pegged to oil instead of pegged to gold. Now our dollar is pegged to oil, and if oil went away, then our economy would fall off the economic cliff. We would, deep recession, whatever. Well, that's in direct conflict with the fact that that is in direct conflict with the ability of humans to continue living on the planet. So do we have to choose between the humans can continue living on the planet and we have to fight climate change and basically shut the fossil fuel industry down? Because if we do that, according to this theory, then the United States economy goes into the deepest, depression. Or if we choose that we have to prop up the oil, we have to prop up the fossil fuel industry because of this petrodollar, then that means that we're choosing to, let the world continue to bake. It's a nonsensical kind of a choice. We can't continue to be on fossil fuels. Obviously we can't. We have to go to a Green New Deal. And this is just creating the fear that if we do that, that the United States economy will tank because it is, quote, is so-called pegged to oil. So I'll just leave it there.
All right. Balthazar, thank you very much for the super chat contribution. And Andrew, thank you very much for the super chat contribution as well. Balthazar's question, what does MMT do with regards to subsidies?
I'm not exactly sure what he means. I need clarification on what he means. Maybe if he could write that again. I'm not sure what he means by subsidies as far as that.
All right. I was hoping you knew because I wasn't quite sure either.
Yeah, no,
all right,
sorry.
Balthazar.
Please clarify. Please clarify.
Clarify a little bit in the chat, Balthazar. We'll get back to your question. We'll move on in the meantime. Joseph wants to know, what are the biggest misconceptions of MMT?
The big lie. The big lie. The federal government is exactly like me and you. We need income. We have to get our money from somewhere else before we can spend. And that's what we're told all the time. The federal government must get their money from somewhere else before they can spend. We have to borrow it from China. We have to get it from taxpayers. That is the biggest misconception of all, because it creates this link that if we believe the big lie, that we have to get money from somewhere before we can get things that we need to survive. We have to get money from the rich before we can have healthcare. We have to get money from the military before we can fix Flint's pipes. It creates a prerequisite that we have to wrest money from the cold, dead hands of the powerful or beg them for charity before we can get anything. That is easily the biggest myth of all. Easily, because it pits people together. So, as I said last week very clumsily, racism is a tool to tear the people apart. Xenophobia is the same thing, a tool to tear the people apart. All of these, I forget the term with homosexual, the anti-that is a tool to tear the people apart. And economic ignorance is the same thing, is a tool to tear the people apart. And it pits people against each other. So we say, oh, we must get money from the rich in order to pay for stuff. Then this huge population of people comes to us and say, how dare you penalize success? Who creates the jobs anyway? So we can't take the money from the rich, even though it makes no sense to take money from anybody. Taxing the rich is incredibly important to reduce inequality. That's as a progressive, I believe that's true. We must tax the rich in order to decrease their power. They should not be able to buy politicians. They should not be able to extract wealth from our sickness and our death and our suffering. But not only shouldn't we tax the rich for their money, we can't tax the rich for their money. It's not possible because the federal government creates its own money and doesn't need any income. Same with the military. We must reduce the military, in my opinion, because we're belligerent. We're the bullies of the world. And we can't do it immediately. We have to do it responsibly because we've been horrible for so long. But I believe we should reduce the military, as I'm sure many people agree with in this audience. But we can't reduce the military in order to get that money for something else. It doesn't make economic sense to do that. And the big lie, creates this link that we must reduce the military in order to get their money to pay for healthcare. We must tax the rich in order to get their money to pay for the programs that we need to survive. And that is easily the biggest misconception of all. It pits everybody against everybody.
Well, that's a misconception that people talk about in regards to like what MMT, that's a misconception in the world, right? And MMT tries to combat that misconception, according to their theory. But yes. Joe's question specifically, I think what he wants to know is, what are the biggest misconceptions about MMT itself? Since you've been involved with these theories, what are some misconceptions people have about MMT? Do some people think it's a wrestling move? What's going on?
Understood. Yeah, no, that's different. That's different than I thought. People think that MMT is something that you do. It's something that you prescribe to. It's something that we must choose to implement. And it's nothing of the sort. It's knowledge. It's just knowledge. MMT is an expression of how our economy actually works. It is not, MMT doesn't say we should tax the rich. MMT doesn't say we shouldn't. MMT doesn't say how much we should or shouldn't. It doesn't say any of these things. So our government takes the knowledge of MMT and chooses to give the wealthy, as many tax breaks as they want. But what MMT does say is that if you tax the rich, then it would have these macroeconomic effects related to reducing inequality and related to empowering the people. It is not something that prescribes anything. It only describes. And a big misconception of MMT is that people are afraid to subscribe to it because they feel like they therefore must choose to pursue certain things or choose to pursue them in a certain way. But it's just like medicine. You can choose to, if you learn medicine, you can choose to cure people. You can choose to do horrible Nazi experiments. You can choose to never practice at all. You don't blame medicine. Medicine doesn't describe what you should do with it. It's just knowledge. And the same thing with modern money. It's just knowledge of how things work.
Okay. So then MMT itself doesn't actually suggest we start pumping. Does MMT itself, like as far as, and when I say MMT itself, I mean some of the thinkers behind this, yeah. Does it go as far to suggest that we should start using this knowledge to actually bring about programs that help people? Or is that something that progressives later latched onto?
I think that the major economists of MMT, I think, could generally be described as progressive, because there's no consequence of being progressive, because there's no negative economic consequence to doing these things. So it doesn't say, actually, if you could repeat the specific thing that you mentioned.
Well, I guess what I was getting at here is you don't really see people on the right talking, at least not to my knowledge. Correct me if I'm wrong. I never hear people on the right really talking about MMT. It's more talked about in the progressive communities. Okay. That could be a reflection more of just the circles I usually find myself in. But to my knowledge, I've not really seen it being talked about a lot on the right. So, what I'm asking is, and I think you answered my question, actually. So you're saying it's more of just a natural, because people subscribe to the tools of MMT and the knowledge base that is MMT, they're just naturally progressive because they're thinking, well, we can just print the money to have all these great things. Instead, we just print the money to help the elite and the powerful. They're in on this big scheme, essentially, and they're trying to keep it from the rest of us. Well, it's time for us to take it back.
As far as the right, what I can say is that the powerful have a very big incentive to not have us understand this, because it would educate us on how to stand up to them. But MMT is what reveals the big lie to be a lie. And it shows that the powerful hide behind the big lie to hide the fact that they simply don't want to give it to us, and they're simply being selfish and want to stay powerful. It reveals that. So it's an excuse. The big lie is the excuse to pretend that, I want to do these things for you, but I can't because of these external things, these economic things that are out of my control. When the truth is that they just don't want to give it to us because it empowers us. As far as the right, the people, I'm not talking about the politicians on the right, but just the people on the right,
Mm-hmm.
they are terrified. Not they. There are a lot of people that are terrified of their taxes going up, and they look to the big programs that we want, and healthcare and education and so on. And they're not against healthcare and they're not against education, but they are terrified that implementing these things will raise their taxes. And so they are genuinely believe that they will go bankrupt. Their family will go bankrupt. The country will go bankrupt. And so they stand against our progressive programs because of their taxes going up, even though it makes no economic sense for their taxes to go up. So as I said before, it pits the people against each other. So if we could educate the people who believe that their taxes are going to go up, that in fact they don't need to, then how many of them would join us and fight for these things, fight for this healthcare stuff? I think that the politicians on, I'll say the right, I don't really have my head around what that means, but the more conservative, people that cater to the powerful, I think is, they have an incentive to educate the people and distract them with racism and xenophobia and so on to get what they want.
So Balthazar clarified the question. If we effectively print money for programs, why are we subsidizing industries?
Why are we because the politicians are paid to subsidize industries. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's a more complicated answer than that, unless I'm maybe misunderstanding. They're paid to give the powerful what they want because the powerful pay them to do it. I don't see anything, more than that, unless I'm misunderstanding his question.
I think that's...
Yeah.
All right. Luther Dean, here's a question I can answer. Can someone tell me the MMT guy's name so I can look him up? Yes, his name is Jeff Epstein. He's with Citizens Media TV. And we got a few minutes left here for questions. So fire in your questions now. And once we're done here, we're going to do a last plug, and Jeff's going to plug all the places you can find him. So,
and if I just
thanks, Luther, for giving me one I can handle.
And if I just may say, the pinned post on Twitter, Citizens Media TV, is a tutorial that I wrote about MMT.
Awesome. All right, here's one from ConnectTheDots.USA. Great job, Jeff. Under MMT, how do we determine how much tax to ward off inflation and hoarding and create demand for the dollar?
Excellent question. This is where things matter, because the only thing that dictates inflation, and first of all, inflation is not when the price of bread goes up. It's not when the price of cars go up. It's not when the price of things in the whole industry go up. Inflation is when everything in the United States goes up. That's inflation. Inflation is a big deal. And the way that it's used currently is just as a scare word. That is not technically what inflation means. Inflation is when everything goes up. So how do you prevent inflation? And conceptually, it's very simple. If you have the real resources to do something, you do it. If you don't have the real resources to do something, you don't. So if we want to give everybody in the country a horse, and among progressive friends, will say Pony for All Act of 2018, the Hillary Bernie thing. But if you want to give everybody in the country a horse, we have 320 million people. We have roughly 500,000 horses in the country. So in order to get that up to 320 million, we must reproduce those horses. So how to get to 320 million? How long would that take? We have to consider their gestation period. Say, 9 months. And how long after it's born can a mommy do it again? They have to do their thing over and over and over and over again. So let's say 20 years. It takes 20 years to get up to 320 million horses. And that has incredible consequences. Now we need more veterinarians. We need more food. We need more farms. We need more fencing. So now we need more horseshoes. That means we need more blacksmiths and veterinarians. Now we need to educate more blacksmiths and more veterinarians. It creates an industry, which is a great consequence, although that is not the point of what I'm saying. It does create an industry that profits, that helps the people. But the real resources has incredible consequences associated to it. We cannot create 320 million ponies in 5 years. I don't care if you throw $10 trillion at it. I don't care if you write a law that says it has to happen. It's not going to happen because the real resources prevent it from happening. Money does not change the gestation period of a horse. It doesn't change how fast people can be educated and so on. So to prevent inflation is to simply keep track of the real resources at your disposal and to not spend money into the economy that you don't have resources to handle, that you can't, the production can't handle, and you adjust as necessary as consequences happen. But real resources matter, not money. And as long as you respect your real resources, then you won't have inflation.
All right, so we got a couple more things here, and I want to add on to what you just said here. I'm going to have a question. Brent, thank you for the Super Chat contribution. And Brent says, thanks for this info. Come back again. Celeste, thank you very much for the Super Chat contribution. And Celeste says, thank you, Jeff. Please come back again. Guys, thank you very much for those sentiments on behalf of both Jeff and myself. But also, keep in mind, he's still here for a few more minutes. So ask him questions now. He's still here. And also, going on what you said, and then we got a question from A. Mars coming up, Jeff. But going on what you just said about, resources just being resources no matter what, money can't change that. Does MMT go into the ideas of bartering at all? Is that something that's under the MMT umbrella at all, or is it just specific? I mean, obviously, modern monetary theory is in the title, but
well,
just
no, it doesn't. It really has nothing to do with bartering. I can say that no major economy in history has been based on bartering. There is a myth that I believed myself a few months ago that a government came into a society that was, had this great bartering society and then imposed its money on top of it. And then people started using the money in between, instead of trading a muffin for a chicken, now I would trade a muffin for $1 and then I'd walk over to the chicken store and buy a chicken. So it would separate that bartering. That's not the case. It's not historically accurate to say that any society started with bartering and then government came in and then took over that society with money. That is a common misconception.
Well, I mean, we had gift economies too at one point. I mean, we just had like economies that were just based on goodwill at certain points in human history.
I'm not aware of any major economies that are exclusively based on bartering. I mean, we have like cigarettes in jail and stuff like that.
Well, do you believe there's a value to it though? I mean, I do see like some value in bartering, especially given the current condition we're in now. Now I know there's never been a major economy that has taken place solely on bartering. At least I'm not aware of one. You're saying you're not aware of one either. But bartering has certainly had its place throughout history.
I'm not saying
I value to it.
There's nothing wrong with bartering. There's nothing wrong with bartering at all. I'm sure it has its place in a number of kinds of things. But as far as being part of MMT at all, it's not.
It's separate. All right. So A. Mars has a cool question. Who's responsible for calling it a Fed, and then this word's in quotes, budget?
Who is responsible for calling it a budget? I don't know the answer to that. But I can say that the budget. Let me say this. So if the budget of us compared to the budget of the federal government, I'm using this as an excuse to teach something else. I don't know the specific answer to where that name came from. Maybe she means something else. I'm not sure.
Well, I think you're taking the question very literally, and I don't think that's how it's actually intended here. I think they're saying like, who's really behind spreading this misinformation, saying it's all about a budget. I think that's what they mean by the question. I don't think they mean who's the guy that came up with this. I think they're
okay.
I think it's not meant to be totally literal.
Well, maybe it's there is incredible incentive to miseducate the public in order to stay powerful. I mean, perhaps that answers the question. There is incredible incentive to get the people to fear the debt and the deficit and the budget, the federal, the balanced budget and the surplus and so on. It is incredibly beneficial to miseducate the people on these things because that makes us fear asking for what we need to survive. Because if we do ask for these things that we need to survive, then we fear incorrectly that it will cause economic chaos. And that's not true. What it will only do is cause economic chaos to the elite that have the power in the current system. It only hurts the corrupt. It only hurts the few. And, they're the ones in charge.
All right. So Lou13 wants to know if you have any insights or would like to talk about the stock market.
don't know how the stock market really has no reflection on my life. The stock market seems to be a reflection on how well the powerful are doing. Whether the stock market goes up or crashes really has no bearing on my day-to-day existence. That's really all I can think about saying it.
All right. Jilly says, I want a unicorn with glitter and bubbles. Don't hate me. We don't hate you, Jilly. I also want a unicorn with glitter and bubbles.
So what would it take to get a unicorn with glitter and...
Right? They just got to print it, right? They just got to print it and make it happen. Balthazar, however, is a little more demanding. Balthazar says, ponies suck. Give me a dragon. I don't know about that, Balthazar. That might be a little harder. But Jordan says, do we know what Bernie's stance on MMT is?
That's an excellent question. Okay, so I believe strongly that he gets it, I believe strongly that he gets it. He had Stephanie Kelton as his economic advisor during his 2016 campaign. She is a founder of the Sanders Institute. I'm pretty sure she's still with him. She was also on the budget committee for Congress in 2015. I am pretty sure that Bernie knows MMT. However, in 2016 especially, he said some very un-MMT things. I didn't know it at the time because I didn't know about this subject until February. I didn't even know it existed. So he put out a big pay-for document in 2016. It's still on his website, berniesanders.com, all the way at the bottom, issues. I think on the issues page, and then at the bottom it says how he pays for his programs. This whole thing of this program will be paid for this with taxes for this and this, and it's all makes no economic sense. And how I see it is that he does understand MMT, but he has zero clue on how to deal with a populace that doesn't just not understand it, but believes that it's crazy.
Well, don't you think he's also playing the political game there? I mean, if a politician tomorrow just said, oh, MMT, we're just going to print it off and that's going to take care of it, we're still a long way from that messaging being effective on a mass level, which I think just being practical, that's just the reality. So
that is true.
This idea of exposing where the quote budget really goes, I think is still very worthwhile messaging. It's worthwhile to point out to people that the reason we don't have, or one of the many reasons why we don't have the types of programs other countries take for granted, is because we spend all of that money that we're told is all the money that's allotted on bombs. I still think that's a worthwhile message.
Well, again, if we say, we absolutely should say that our military is belligerent and it needs to be lowered. We absolutely should say that. We should fight for that as hard as we can, hard as we do. Same thing with the rich. We should tax the rich. They're just too powerful. But it is critical that we don't then say we must reduce the military because they're belligerent, and just imagine what we could use that money for. We could fix Flint's pipes. We could give us healthcare. We could pay off student debt. That's the connection that I'm urging everyone to break. We should be against the military. We should be against income inequality. And we should fight for healthcare and for forgiving student debt and fixing Flint's pipes. We absolutely should be doing both of these things. But what we must stop doing is connecting them by taking the money from the powerful as a prerequisite to getting what we need to survive. But it's just that separation.
I understand where you're coming from. I do disagree slightly. I think that you need to, if you really show people how catastrophic having an economy of war really is, they're going to be more susceptible to, well, what's the type of society we could have? And if you show them in a more basic economic way, such as making the connections of, well, gee, we could fix homelessness, we could have universal health care, we could have free college, then you're kind of leading them more towards and by the way, they just print money at will for all these disastrous programs that pads their own pocket. We could use this knowledge to start funding and sustaining programs that benefit everybody. I think you're pitting two things against each other that aren't necessarily against each other.
But what I'm trying to suggest, and the one thing that I disagree with you, is every point that you just made is there's nothing wrong with it. However, we can keep exactly the military that we have today without any change at all and still fix Flint's pipes and have our education and have our health care.
But we shouldn't do that.
You're correct. We shouldn't do that. We shouldn't have the military be what it is, but we don't have to postpone that fight for fixing Flint's pipes and healthcare and education and all these things. We don't have to postpone that fight in the least. Sure. We should start fighting for those things, regardless what the military is. Because if we organize and we force them to give us forgiving student debt or healthcare or whatever it is, behind the scenes, they're going to have to make moral or ethical or even efficiency choices to make that happen, which will reduce the military, which will force them to consider their taxes on the tax breaks for the rich and so on. But if we fight both of these battles at the same time, I think we're pretty much guaranteed to lose. I think my opinion, some people should fight against the military being belligerent. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't choose to do that. My choice is to fight for healthcare, fight for forgiving student debt, fight for fixing Flint's pipes, and to focus 100% on that without saying we should have these things because doing it for the military is wrong. We should just have these things, period. And it will take something behind the scenes for them to shuffle real resources around in order to give us those things. But it is a separate fight to say that the military is belligerent, because we can start getting what we need today. We can start getting what we need today, regardless of the injustices that are out there already.
All right. So we are totally out of time. Please use these last few minutes to tell people where they can learn more.
Sure. So my Twitter page is Citizens Media TV. The pinned tweet is an MMT tutorial that I think is pretty good. I tweet about MMT all the time. I do have an article about petrodollar that I just wrote at the request of one of your viewers, which I've been wanting to look into, and I'm glad she pushed me to do it, or he pushed me to do it. I don't know. So there's a petrodollar article I recommend reading. Everything I know is in there. And I'm part of Real Progressives. If you want to learn more about MMT, at the bottom of that thread of the Twitter tutorial are lots of resources to other economists to follow. There is a group on Facebook, Modern Monetary Theory for Real Progressives, that I highly recommend getting involved with. Very smart non-experts that you can ask questions. That I ask questions there pretty much every day.
Well, Jeff, what's a website because some people in the chat pointed out they're not on Twitter or Facebook. What's a good website too? Just a general website.
My own website is http://citizensmedia.tv. But I do.
How about you say that again a little slower, buddy?
Citizensmedia.tv.
That's the website?
http://
Oh,
yes.
you're just giving the. All right, so citizensmedia.tv.
Citizensmedia.tv is my website.
Okay.
But the Twitter is, I mean, you can go on Twitter even if you don't have an account and see my pinned tweet for Citizens Media TV. I don't have that duplicated elsewhere. But.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Citizensmedia.tv is the website to learn more. Jeff's Twitter handle, citizensmediatv. And this has been our presentation on MMT. I learned a lot. I hope you guys did too. I know we didn't get to every single question. I apologize for that. We did the best we could. Thank you so much for asking great questions. And Jeff, thanks so much for doing this, man. You guys know the drill with me. RonPlacone.com for all the tour dates. November 2nd, Sacramento. November 3rd, San Francisco. November 17th, Santa Barbara. That was just added. So going to be in California a bit. November 23rd, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Want to support this on the sustainable end. Patreon.com/RonPlacone. Check out Jeff's stuff over at citizensmedia.tv. Jeff, thanks so much for doing this. Have a wonderful weekend, my man.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you to all your viewers and questions I did not expect. It was good.
All right, and we'll be back on Monday, guys. This has been Get Your News On with Ron, the world's first viewer-curated streaming news show. I will see you guys on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Have a great weekend. And the podcast comes out tomorrow.